Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the beginning of the 2028 offseason. It was a very good year for the Wings. We had the best record in baseball, 101 and 61, a 29 game improvement from the 72 wins we had in our second season with the Wings last year. The 101 wins actually have pushed our record to over 500 in our 3 years as general manager slash manager of the Wings. We were, however, swept out of the playoffs by the Cincinnati Reds in the NLCS. They went on to win the World Series. They won 11 of their 12 playoff games. We did have a 3-2 win over the Colorado Rockies in the divisional series, so we do have some experience winning a playoff series at this point, but obviously a long way to go after getting swept out of the NLCS by the Cincinnati Reds. As we start thinking about next season, one thing that is disappointing is that our budget was cut by $6 million, despite having about as good a season as we could have. Over 100 wins, as I mentioned, the best record in baseball, basically sold out or were very close to selling out just about every game over the course of the entire season. Really can't do more than we did. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough for ownership, and our budget is going to be smaller than it was a year ago. And we've had to cut our scouting and player development budgets considerably just to free up a little bit of potential money to use in the upcoming free agency period. As I talked about at the end of the last episode, we do have a few arbitration eligible players that we will look to move on from, which should hopefully free up a little more money for us to spend. But particularly with the limited amount of money we have available for extensions in 2030 at this point, going to be hard to sign a marquee free agent this year. And as we'll talk about shortly, that is a bit unfortunate because there's one marquee free agent who would fit our team really well. We mentioned at the end of our last episode that potentially improving at catcher, first base, and third base were three key areas for us to focus on in the upcoming offseason. Fake Name gave us the suggestion of perhaps moving outfielder Nick York to first base. And I think that's definitely something for us to consider. Although he's only 6 feet tall, he's reasonably proficient at playing the position, and his infield ratings are much better than Ota, who we played at first base for much of this year. So that's definitely an option. There is part of me, though, with York being an excellent right-handed hitter who totally rakes against left-handers, and Takao Ota being a left-handed hitter who can't say he rakes against right-handers, but he definitely does better against right-handers than left-handers. Potentially doing a platoon at first base with those two guys for the upcoming season is an option as well. Similarly, if I could speak here, that would be helpful to me. Similarly, if we don't end up upgrading at third base with Kevin Made, the right-handed hitter, and Nolan Jones, the left-handed hitter, we could potentially do a platoon at third base next year, kind of more explicit platoons at both of those positions than we had this past year that can maybe extract a little more offense than we had this past season out of those positions. Hard to see us doing anything at catcher, though, or being able to do anything with the catchers we currently have. Samuel Basallo, who's going to be a Rookie of the Year candidate, is a DH slash first base slash catcher, best at DH with his defensive limitations. And then Jonah Heim and Joey Bart are decent defensive catchers who don't bring much in terms of the bat. One of them could end up as our backup next year if the prices are reasonable, but I think a starting catcher is the thing that we really need to figure out this upcoming off season. One or two other things that I would like to mention. Marcelo Meyer, the shortstop we made a big trade for with the Red Sox last offseason to take over, hopefully, as our long-term shortstop, and we signed him to a big extension to allow him to do that. Good news is that he is healed from his injury. He suffered a broken bone in his elbow at the end of, or the middle of July, that cost him the rest of the season. The bad news is that he's 25 years old, going to be turning 26 in a little over a month, and he's now fragile in terms of his injury proneness. So I think he will be a real productive player when we can keep him in the lineup. The issue is that now that he's fragile, that's going to be a little bit more of a struggle for us to do, unfortunately. So that was one disappointing piece of news. Also mentioned in the last episode that one of the things I'm going to be looking to do is really upgrade the lower levels of our minor league system with some guys with good personalities and some guys who are also a little better players to hopefully ensure that our rookie teams in particular and even our A and A plus teams in particular are more competitive. So you can see we've already made offers for minor league contracts to a lot of players in addition to offers to avoid arbitration with a few of our arbitration eligible players. And then that brings us to talking about the catcher position. Upcoming free agents at catcher is a rather robust class, potentially including Sean Murphy, who we traded away last year, still suffering from that post-concussion syndrome. But most notably, Adley Rutschman, 30 years old, going to be 31 before the season starts. Excellent defensive catcher with an excellent bat as well. He's had 152 and 151 OPS pluses each of the last 2 years for the Orioles organization. He's going to be looking for a ton of money. I don't know that we're going to be able to get near that number, even with some of the moves I mentioned as far as trying to get some salary off the books over the next couple of weeks. No guarantees that he hits the free agent market either, but he would certainly be an interesting player for us to go after. Murphy would be an option. Reese McGuire would be an option if we look a little more for defense. Jose Trevino, obviously, if we look at defense big time, but the bat with him is so rough right now that I don't know that that's a direction that I want to go. Alejandro Kirk, also very interesting, only a bit above average defensively, but certainly the best bat outside of Rutschman of any of these potential free agent catchers. Luis Campusano, kind of a middle of the road candidate, decent defense, decent bat. The bat is not as good as the likes of Rutschman and Kirk, but Campusano's glove and throwing ability a little bit better than we could get with Kirk. So there's definitely options out there to be our starting catcher. As I mentioned, the likes of Joey Bart or Jonah Heim or even a Carson Kelly could end up working as a backup for us next year. And we've also made a trade offer to try to pick up a catcher with some of the arbitration eligible players that we are likely not to make offers to. Johnny DeLuca and Bryce Miller in particular, I think we want to just get them traded. Misael Tamares is a guy who we would bring back, but if we can get a trade for a catcher done, given that he's going to be making a little over $3 million this coming year, he's a guy that we'd be willing to move on from as well. So that is kind of the lay of the land here as the offseason and the arbitration period are beginning. And we'll try to see what happens over the next few weeks in terms of award season, where, as I mentioned, I think we've got a real strong candidate for Rookie of the Year. Hopefully we'll be getting some votes for some other awards as well. Would think that Deshaun Seifu should get some MVP votes after his real interesting season. Probably not going to win the award, though. And would think that we'll have some guys get some votes for the Cy Young Award as well. So award season will be more interesting for these Wings than it has been in previous years. But the goal is to try to figure out what we want this roster to look like over the next few weeks before free agency begins, and potentially free up a little bit of money to go after a big-time catcher, as well as potentially trying to make a trade for a guy who could be our backup catcher next year. And I've been going back and forth over the last couple days on that deal for a backup catcher that I had alluded to, and I think we may finally have something done with San Diego. We're paying a lot to bring Jake Rogers on board, but he is a very good defensive catcher with a little bit of pop in his bat. He was the starter for San Diego this year. I am envisioning him as our backup. I think he'd be a better backup defensively than we've had over the course of this playthrough, and honestly, a decent bat. He's arbitration eligible, only set to make about 1.9 million this coming year. At 33 years old, he's not a long-term solution, but I think he is a better overall defensive catcher than the likes of Bart or Heim or Carson Kelly, who we'd likely be spending more money on in the free agent market this year. We have to give up a lot of players to bring him on board, but I don't think they're players that are going to cause a huge problem for us. Johnny DeLuca is the center fielder. I like the fact that he's durable, but he spent most of this year in AAA for us. As I talked about in the last episode, kind of feel like we've got one too many outfielders right now at the major league level, and he's set to make around $3.5 million next year. So don't know if I want to be paying that much for a fifth outfielder, especially with the opportunity to maybe open up some money and try to chase after a big time player like Rutschman. And then the reliever Bryce Miller, another guy who's set to make over $3.5 million this upcoming season in arbitration. He's pitched well for us when he hasn't been hurt, but you look at his profile and he's a pretty generic right-handed reliever. Definitely has some value because he is a guy who has enough stamina that he could start for us in a pinch. He did start 12 games for us back in the 2026 season, our debut season in the majors. I just don't know that I want to be paying him over $3.5 million a year. So we can get some value, including those two. We have to include a 20-year-old catcher, Luis Almazan. Don't love his defensive ability, even though he looks like he could have a bat, somewhat similar to Rogers down the line. Center fielder Chris Athanas, guy who we picked in the 12th round back in 2026. Good personality, good defensively. Don't think he's ever going to be a big-time major league hitter. Pitcher Eric Yasso, who we picked in the 5th round back in 2027. Great personality, but he is going to be a reliever at the major league level. Don't love giving up on him. He was 3-3 this past year with a 3.59 ERA, 84 strikeouts, and 67 2/3 innings. But I just think that as a reliever, his stuff will be a little better. But he's still going to be, best case scenario, a pretty generic right-handed reliever. And then we have to add in one more player, including some really big-time prospects, but also some guys who aren't as big prospects. The guy that I'll add in to get the deal done is center fielder Derek Mitchell, guy who doesn't have the best personality in the world, spent the last couple years in single A and high A ball for us, did hit .281 with 21 homers, but don't see him with the lack of contact and the below average eye, well below average as far as strikeouts. Don't see him being a big time contributor to us at the major league level in the future. So I agree we're giving up a lot of personnel for a guy who we envision as our backup catcher, but it will definitely stabilize us defensively at backup catcher. If things really fall apart this offseason and we can't find another catcher, we could start Rogers. He's good enough defensively that I wouldn't feel horrible about that. And I did shop DeLuca and Bryce Miller separately, and there's not a ton of demand for those guys. They're clearly the two top players in this, but with the amount of money that they're making, doesn't seem like other general managers view them as having a ton of value either. So we are going to add Derek Mitchell into the deal, and we are going to go ahead and complete the trade. So that brings a backup catcher for us for next year on board. And you can see we've definitely freed up a little bit of more money to potentially use if we want to get creative when free agency begins in a few weeks. And the Gold Glove players have been announced, and the Buffalo Wings now have their first Gold Glove Award winner, Deshaun Seifu. We talked about his defense a lot over the 2.5 years since we drafted him, and with the good coaching that we do have, his range and error ratings have improved. And he just won a Gold Glove at second base, so I think he's going to be at that position for the long term. His zone rating and his defensive efficiency at that position were both really good, and certainly with the bat that he brings, league-leading triples figure for the second year in a row with 100 stolen bases and a 5.5 WAR on the year. Think that Mr. Seifu will continue to bring us a lot of value. A Gold Glove Award and a first-time All-Star for the 24-year-old here in 2028. And in Buffalo's third year of existence, a couple of days after we got our first Gold Glove winner in franchise history, we have our first Silver Slugger winner in franchise history. The rookie designated hitter, Samuel Basallo, who, as I've talked about in the past, I think is going to be a strong candidate for Rookie of the Year. 273 average, 34 doubles, 34 homers, 109 ribbies, 856 OPS, 3.1 WAR on the season. The catcher slash first baseman slash DH is best as a designated hitter, but for a guy that we got in the expansion draft and then have developed through our minor league system, he's turned out to be a pretty valuable player, and he is now the National League Silver Slugger at designated hitter. And as expected, Samuel Basallo was a strong candidate for Rookie of the Year. Such a strong candidate that he was a unanimous winner of the award. All 32 first-place votes went to Basallo. Takao Ota, the first baseman who came over from Japan, also got some votes, driven more by his 22 home runs, I would guess, than his 201 batting average. But 2 of the top 7 rookies in the National League this past year were Buffalo Wings, including the winner, Samuel Basallo. And we made it to the arbitration hearings. We are going to have one arbitration hearing. Misael Tamares, who spent most of this year in AAA for us, not happy and didn't want to speak with us, which I get after he's been a pretty proven MLB player, and he ended up getting largely caught in a numbers game this year and spending the year at AAA. We would like to bring him back, feel that Tamares can be potentially a swing man in the rotation for us. He did start 22 games for us in 2026. I think the first crack at our number 5 starter is going to be Kim, but he certainly has an arsenal that he could be a spot starter for us and a pretty effective reliever, with the fact that we did move on from the other arbitration eligible pitcher, Miller there. Feel like bringing Tamares back as a proven arm out of the bullpen. If we can get him at our price, even better. He'll probably end up with about $3.6 million if the arbitrator agrees with him. Given that he spent most of this year in AAA, I have a hard time believing he's going to get a huge bump from that $2.9 million he made last year. We're giving him a $250,000 bump. We tend to think that we'll win this arbitration hearing, but we'll find out shortly. And of course, I was wrong. He won. He got close to $3.6 million a year, so that's going to cost us a little bit more money than we had hoped. Obviously, we could look to try to trade him away if we really needed to free some money for a potential free agent. And we're going to find out tomorrow who actually is going to be on the free agent list for this upcoming offseason. So we've made it to the beginning of free agency. I'll take a quick look at the international free agents, whether there's anyone who at a first glance looks particularly compelling for us to chase after. Catcher Kenma Nataka, decent defensively, but doesn't look like he's got a real major league bat. Bing Kui looks like a backup. He's also in his mid-30s. First baseman Humberto Malpica looks similar-ish to Ota, probably not quite as good. I don't think that's a direction that will go down. Shortstop Toshimitsu Kato. Ooh, really like his glove, really like his speed. The only question with him is the bat. We've only got average scouting accuracy on the 21-year-old at this point. I'll give you a contract that becomes major league guaranteed if we decide you make the team. We'll see what he has to say. Obviously, I would like to also request a scouting report on him to get to know him better. But clearly, that glove has potentially a lot of value as a major league shortstop. He's got some speed. I don't know about the bat, particularly right now. It doesn't seem with that 30 contact and that 35 home run power that he's anywhere near major league ready. But if we can get him into our camp with a minor league option, at least we've got 30 days from the start of the season to figure out what we want to do with him if he doesn't make the major league team. And there's also the right fielder, Akira Matsuno. Looks like a decent defensive outfielder, not much of a bat. I'll throw a minor league contract his way, and we'll also request a scouting report on him. So it doesn't look like there's any real top-line talent this year as far as the international free agents. Clearly, Kato with that defense could be an interesting player if his bat develops. Major league free agents, though, and it looks like, I'm guessing from the highlights here, that Rutschman signed a deal with the Orioles. Otherwise, I would expect that he would be listed as one of the top prospects out there. So he was going to be tough for us to get with the money that I thought he was looking for anyways. But obviously would have loved to potentially have that problem to deal with. Actually, he is a free agent. That's really weird that they did not list him as one of the more notable free agents hitting the market, because I think he's probably better than just about any of these guys. He's younger than most of them at 30 years old. The youngest guy out there is the center fielder, Riley Green, who could help us. Pretty solid bat, pretty solid glove. But I think catcher is certainly a more position of more urgent need for us right now. So taking a look at the pitchers who are available, obviously a lot of big-time relievers and closers, it looks like. Thinking about potential starters, not that we need one, but looks like the wrecked Max Fried is the best of the crew that is potentially out there. And then taking a look at the batters in general, Rutschman, Kirk, Jose Abreu, who we had a few years ago and we moved on because we felt he was getting old, had a really nice year, 300 average, 24 homers, 97 ribbies for the Red Sox in 2028. So his bat still pretty productive. Tim Anderson, I guess we could think about him for our third base slot. Willie Adames, another guy to consider. And as I mentioned, a lot of catchers potentially out there. With the fact that Sean Murphy's not on the list, it does look like Nashville took advantage of their opportunity to exercise that option and bring him back after we traded him away. We'll at least find out how much and how long Rutschman is looking for. Almost $40 million a year over 8 years. So it's a gigantic number that he is looking for. But clearly, bringing on a premier defensive catcher who is the premier offensive catcher in baseball, it looks like, with 5 silver sluggers at this point. As I mentioned, he's had OPS pluses and WRC pluses over 150 each of the last 2 years. We don't have the money right now to bring him on board. Clearly, if we wanted to pare scouting and player development down to embarrassing levels, that opens up plenty of money for us to bring him on board. And we are kind of in a win now mode with the fact that we had the best record in baseball last year. So if you've got thoughts on what we should do, would love to hear them. Reese McGuire, captain personality, really good defense, just not going to hit all that much over the course of his major league career. 79 OPS, 76 WRC plus. Not a horrible hitter, but he could certainly be the fallback if we're looking for defense. Obviously, Jose Trevino, perennial Gold Glove winner in the American League at catcher. He would be a really nice addition for our pitching staff. He's going to be 36 years old soon. Looking for pretty big money also. But if things don't work out with Rutschman, and Rutschman's going to be a challenge to figure out the contract situation, we'll probably have to trade away a player or two to be able to rebolster our scouting and development budgets, because I don't want to just completely ignore our farm system going forward. But he would be a huge addition to this team to be able to bring him on board. First base, third base, other positions that we're interested in. Brayu, probably not the answer at his age. Guess we can make an argument for Jake Cronenworth as a first baseman or a third baseman. Looking for $8 million, so he could be a fallback if Rutschman did not work. Among potential third baseman, obviously Cronenworth works there. Tim Anderson could play third for us. I don't know if I love that at his age of 35 at this point. But there's definitely going to be some interesting options, and if we pull back those scouting and development budgets to very low levels, we can make a play for anybody that is going to be a free agent this offseason. But I am definitely tempted by Rutschman. I don't know that I want to give him $39+ million a year. I definitely don't want to sign him for 8 years, but should we get creative and offer him something that at least makes him think about moving from Baltimore on up to Buffalo and joining our team? Because in our effort to improve catcher this offseason, I don't think we could do any better than that. And certainly a improved offensive and defensive catcher would be a big step forward for our team, and would hopefully help ensure that we can remain competitive for not just the NL East, but hopefully contending for a National League pennant in the next few years if we add a guy like him to our team. So very interested in your thoughts on what, if anything, we should do in free agency this year. Still think that catcher and then potentially corner infield are the two spots that, if we are going to spend some money, would be the places that we most likely spend them. I definitely could make an argument that Riley Green would be somebody to consider for center field. He definitely has better range and error ratings than our current center fielder, Vance Honeycutt. So we could try to bring Riley Green on board. Over the course of his major league career, he's certainly been an above average offensive player. but do we make a play for Riley Green in center field, and then that would allow us to move the 6'3" Vance Honeycutt back to first base, where he would give us the best offense of any of our first base options, quite honestly, with probably about the best defense that anyone on our team has. So that would be an option as well. I think I prefer to swing for the fences with Rutschman because catcher is more of a real hole for us right now. But to me, one other option would be, and it would be a more economical option, to potentially go to Riley Green to upgrade our defense in center field while still having a productive offensive player in that position. That would allow us to definitely put Honeycutt as our full-time first baseman and help our defense there, and certainly give us more consistent offense than we got from Oda this past offseason. And then Oda could be more of a platoon guy for us or a bat off the bench. And there's probably something else that's interesting that I'm not even noticing right now that those of you who are looking at this may see that I'm not seeing. So if you've got thoughts on where we should go and what we should do this off season, would love to hear them. Please share them in the comments, and you'll find out what I am thinking, hopefully with some help from our loyal viewers, in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.